Tonight I will be speaking about the changes in the economic structures which we have observed in Sub-Saharan Africa during the last 2 decades, more precisely, let's say 1991, 2011, 2012. The changes I will be discussing concern the changes in production structure, a little bit on trade structure, on the structure of inequality, tendencies and structure of inequality, and population. As far as the changes in production structure, we see that Africa has undergone, together with other developing regions, some suboptimal changes. These changes basically can be summarized in a large increase in the share of mining and oil in total output for the region as a whole, and of course much more in some specific countries. An equally large increase in services, which is not normally observed in mature economies, and some of these services are modern services like finance, insurance, real estate, and so on and so forth, communication, but a lot of it is what we may call subsistence services, so like informal sector services, which tend to be highly unequalizing, and they do tend to have a very low value added per capita. Thirdly, we have observed a decline in the share of manufacturing in the total value added, which is pretty much at variance with what we have observed in low-income Asian countries like Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Bhutan, and so on and so forth, which have more or less the same income level as many of the Sub-Saharan African countries. And finally, some rise in agriculture. In many countries, one would have expected the share of value added in agriculture should have declined because of the economic development that Africa has recorded. But this has not occurred, and we see that this increase in value added in agriculture can be due to a variety of factors, some positive, well, an increase in agricultural productivity, and there is some evidence in some countries in Africa. In other countries, the increase in primary commodity prices in the agricultural sector, and in other cases, sort of a retreat to subsistence agriculture when the other options, the development options that have been explored failed. So altogether, we have a reprimarization of the economy, so a rising share in the agriculture, a rising share in the primary commodities, in particular mining and oil. And you have a decline in what normally is the sectors that tends to grow with the development which has occurred during the last 20 years. And Africa has risen by about 5% per year, or sustained growth during the last 20 years. So the economic structure is developed in a way which was somewhat different from what we expected from start. Part of that has to do with the changes in policies and partly with changes in international conditions. Now, one of the reasons why manufacturing has declined is that Africa, like most other parts of the world, has undergone a trade liberalization, which has consisted in a sort of an average decline of tariffs from about 20% to 10%. And that basically goes hand in hand with the decline in manufacturing, as Africa's former production has been replaced by Indian, Chinese, and basically Asian imports, including in labor-intensive sectors. And so this is a big issue. So Africa is not moving ahead with the industrialization, and this is, I think, is an issue that the policymakers should address. Second thing that we observe is that Africa has gone through a particular trend in the field of income inequality. During these days, everybody talks about the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. But we know that this is not true. In Latin America, inequality during the last 10 years has fallen almost everywhere. And in Africa, it has fallen in 17 out of the 29 countries for which we have the information. Now, the changes in inequality and the changes in output structure are somehow related. Inequality has risen in countries where the share of value added in mining, oil, and utilities has gone up, and modern services has gone up, and government services has gone up. And inequality has fallen in countries where the value-added share of agriculture, particularly due to an increase in agricultural productivity, has gone up. So there are other factors, but this is quite a striking association. So the countries with the rising share in mining, utilities, finance, insurance, real estate, and government services, which are all high skill intensive and capital intensive, basically they show an increase in inequality, while where agriculture and manufacturing and some services, low labor intensive services increase, inequality tends to fall. Now this is quite interesting, and the research which we have conducted has done, I think, the first comprehensive analysis on a macroeconometric panel covering 29 countries, 25 variables for the years 1991 to 2011. Finally, the issue I would like to mention is that rather than having a change in the field of population, there is no change, which is in a way a form of change. And Africa, while all the projections show that the fertility rate has fallen drastically in China, in most of Asia, including in India, Africa, and including in North Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is basically facing a major problem, a stalled demographic transition. Fortunately, mortality rates have fallen very sharply, particularly for the under fives, thanks to vaccination, fights against malaria, tuberculosis, AIDS, and so on and so forth. And life expectancy has risen remarkably from 45 to 60 years from 1990 to 2010. But this has not been accompanied by a rise by a fall in fertility. So, and for instance, Nigeria, which is the largest country in the region, has basically the same rate of fertility which it had 20 years ago. Now, this gives maybe a source of problems. First of all, because if we continue like that, Africa, which has not even 900 million or something like that this time, will be over 2.2 billion by the end of the century. And that means that food production, of which the country is already highly deficient, has to increase very, very much. Now, this will increase food dependence, which I don't think is a very good thing, and will generate quite a number of adverse effects. In 20 years, if the fertility rates of today are sustained, then there will be a huge increase in young people entering the labor market. And we know that it's unlikely that the Sub-Saharan African economy, on average, will be able to generate as many jobs. So in the field of the population issues, and we do see that there is a sort of a stalled demographic transition, which in some countries is being addressed, like in Ethiopia or in Rwanda or in South Africa, but not in Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa as a whole. And this is going to affect a lot agriculture, food sustainability, and so on and so forth. And I think that perhaps it's an issue that the policymakers should be thinking about. Thank you.